Hey guys, a little bit different project today. Because of the whole corona and quarantine situation, the kids, my students, were not able to have the last part of their school year where we usually have our spring concert. So, because of that, a couple weeks into quarantine, we decided to have a virtual concert. So I had each orchestra perform one song, record it on their phones or whatever recording devices they had, send it to me, and I put them all together. So I did two of these. I'm going to show you the second one, the process of how I put it together. The piece is called Declarations. It's by a composer named Jeffery Bishop. I hope you enjoyed this. This goes all the way through from importing the audio files and the video files, the audio part of the video files, all the way through editing and moving things around to make it sound more coherent and make sure everything lines up. And some of the difficulties of working with audio from a bunch of different sources like this, from all these different kids' phones and iPads or whatever else they had to record with. So there are some difficulties with working with audio with background noise. I'll go into a little bit. A lot of different things, timing issues, different intonation issues that come up when you're recording on stuff that wasn't meant to record. Full toned instruments like orchestral instruments. So I'll talk about all that stuff. But let's go ahead and get into it. Alright, so I've got Studio One pulled up here. I've got a song made already for Declarations. And you can see when I started the song, I already set the tempo down here to 62 because I know that's what my starting tempo is going to be. So I'm going to change that. I'm going to show you how to do that in a second. But for right now, I set my starting tempo to where I know I want it to be at the beginning of the song. All the kids were supposed to have recorded their songs watching a video of me conducting the song, so hopefully all their tempos should line up. So that's why I want to keep the tempo steady right from the beginning. So to import a song into Studio One, I've showed you this before, but you go to Song, Import File. These are all the songs I've gotten back from them so far. They're still turning some in. I'll just pick this first one here, double click it, it brings it into your song. Now right off the bat, obviously this is where the sound starts. Right here, this first sound wave is. So I'm going to click right here. Actually, I'm going to take the beginning of this sound file, drag it over so it starts right at the very beginning. And then I'm going to drag this to the front. That way it starts right on the first beat. And I can adjust this some if I need to. But now you should be able to hear it start from the very first beat. Okay, and those are eighth notes in the song. I just happen to know that from looking at the score. So it should be 1 and 2 and. So this really needs to line up about here. We'll fix all that later. But for right now, that's the general idea for how to get the songs or the sound files in there. So I'm going to go ahead and do the rest of those real quick, and then I'll come back. So all my tracks are in here now. I've got all the different songs listed in here from all the different students. You'll notice at the end here they don't all line up, which means that they probably did not all watch the video of me conducting while they played their songs, so they're not going to be the same tempos. Some of them are pretty close, like these two are pretty close, these two are pretty close, which is a good sign. But a few are sticking out way too far or not quite enough. So I'm going to have to do some adjusting, which is okay. Some of it also depends on how long they waited to start playing on the recording, like at the beginning. So some of this will change a little bit, but I'll show you how to do all that in just a second. So next thing I'm going to do is just like I already did with the first one, I'm going to go through and just line everything up at the very beginning of where the actual song starts. So you can see on some of these, like right here on this one, it has a little blip right there. That's probably not where the actual music starts. I'll listen to it to make sure. But the music would probably most likely start right here. So I'm going to go ahead and line all the rest of these up to make sure they're starting right at the very beginning. So now I've got all my songs, all my pieces lined up here at the beginning where they start, and I know this particular piece has a tempo change right at measure 11 in the score. So to do that, right now, like I said earlier, it's set on 62, so right now the entire song is tempo is 62 beats per minute. So to change that in one particular place, I'm going to go to this little clock button here, and this could be different if you use a different software, but this is the one I use, Studio One. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger so I can see it. And right here at measure 11, I need to make a tempo change. And you'll notice right now I can move this, wherever I move my mouse, a little line pops up, and I can put a dot anywhere on this line I want to, just by clicking on it. But I want it to be exactly on measure 11. So what I'm going to do for this is I'm going to click this button right here. You can also use the N key on your keyboard as a shortcut for Studio One, which means it's going to automatically target a certain area. So it's going to skip to something based off of 16th notes, or close to 16th notes. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit more. You can see it when I clicked earlier, just randomly it popped on this exact 16th note. I'm going to go right on measure 11. And then to do this, make a tempo change all of a sudden instead of gradually, you need to do 2 dots. So if you make 1 dot and then move it up to the tempo you wanted, that which is going to be 143 for this piece, it makes it gradual, so it's going to speed up the entire beginning of the song. So you can see that line change as we go back toward the beginning. I don't want that. I want to start to change all of a sudden. So I'm going to make 2 dots right next to each other. I'm going to go ahead and put this one up to, I'm going to right click on it, change it to 143. Now this one's still at 162, and you can see there's a really quick rise right there. So I'm just going to take this one and drag it over so it's also on the line. And I moved it a little bit so make sure it's on 62. And now, as soon as I hit this measure 11, it's going to change tempos. So I'm going to turn the metronome on here so you can hear it. I'm going to mute everything. And I want you to hear the tempo change. So starting back a little bit, starting back a little bit, we'll do it right here. You can hear the click. And now it's faster. So my next step is going to be making sure that all these songs, all these ones I have dragged down in here, change exactly when it gets to measure 11. So to do that, I'm going to have to listen to each one and see where the tempo change is on their particular song. Because some of them might have done it. It looks like it's probably about here on this one. It looks like it's probably here. It looks like it's probably here. But I'll listen to them all to make sure of where it is. And then I'll make a cut based on where that is. So to make a cut on here, you can hit 3 on the keyboard, or you can go to this little split tool. And then I'll just listen to each one and I'll make a cut. And for this, when you do stuff like this, you may want to turn off the snap feature that we turned on earlier, because that way you can snap right up against it. If you have this on, or you can cut up right against it, I'm sorry. If you have this on, you can only cut wherever the snap tells you to go to, which right now looks okay, but if I want to cut on it, there's no in between there with the snap feature on. That's where it jumps to. So you have to turn this off so that you can go right up to it. So I'm going to leave that off for a minute. I'm going to go ahead and cut these right where the tempo. I'm going to go ahead and cut these where the tempo changes, and then I'll come back. Alright, so you can see we've got our tracks in here right now that are split in half. So this is the slower tempo on the left side, the faster tempo on the right side. And some of my students actually sent their recordings in as video recordings, just without the video, so they could have the audio part. So to add those, and they don't import the same way as the music files, the pure audio files. So to import those, click on the little video player button here, hit the plus sign. It'll bring up the video in here. You click on this button to extract the audio, because all we're interested in right now is the audio, not the video part of it. And then the video or the audio will make a new track down here at the bottom. So I'll go ahead and put those 3 video tracks in, and then I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to go ahead and split them into short, or the fast tempo and short and slow tempo over here, and then I'll come back. So now I've got all the tempo changes cut right here, so I know where all the tempos are for each of the tracks I've got. Now what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to adjust some of this so that it sounds good, because we're going to have to, some of this stuff is not lining up exactly, so we're going to have to time stretch a little bit of it to make it sound good. And in Studio One, the time stretch feature is here. It's called Audio Bend, and there's another way you can do it too. I'll show you what that is in a second. But first, go over here to the I, and since these are all violin, viola, cello, and bass, it's an orchestra, so we have instruments that are not very beat-based like drums. By default, all these things are set to drums and time stretch. So what you want to do is go through here, and you can leave it on drums if you want, but sometimes it makes some weird artifacts if you stretch out the audio a little bit. And time stretch just makes it so that if you adjust the tempo, if you adjust the speed of it, it'll try to adjust the audio to match that speed without losing any of the audio. So you want to go to drums, where it says drums, and we're going to go to solo, just to make it a little bit easier on it. And we're going to do this for each one of these. And this is an algorithm, I think, for Ableton, if I remember right. This is called like Warp, something like that. It may look a little different in different DAWs, different programs, but in Studio One, this is one way to do it. So we're going to go through each one of these. Solo, so that whenever it stretches the sound later on, it has a little bit easier time with it. It has a different algorithm with it. Now, one thing I also wanted to mention, make this a little bigger. I noticed this earlier when I was separating these. Right now, we have the tempo of this set to change at measure 11. So it goes a little bit faster than double the tempo at measure 11, which means this part, this particular audio right here, it was recorded at a faster speed. They recorded it, the slow section separately from the fast section, so when I put the two together, this is already recorded at a faster speed. So what we need to do is, if we leave it on the default settings, if we start this and it's on time stretch here, then when we change to, I'll solo this so you can hear it, when we change to measure 11, instead of going eighth notes, it's going to be going this speed, which is twice too fast. So what we need to do is time stretch basically just try to make this already faster tempo match the fast tempo that we put up here. So it's double the fast tempo basically. So for this particular track, go to time stretch, we're going to go to follow. You can see this gets longer, gets bigger. Move it out of the way here. Now when we play this, we're back to eighth notes. Okay, so just double check. I think that's the only one that happened on because, like I said, this is the one where they recorded it in two separate files. So when you put them together, it did that on its own. So just double check. If that happens where something is twice as fast as it should be, go to follow up here instead of time stretch. And that'll let it adjust to this tempo, but not make the entire tempo of the track twice as fast as it should be. Okay, so we're going to click the I, make that go away again. Let me zoom back out here so you can see the entire thing. So this is what we're working with right now. So our next step is going to be figuring out exactly where all of these start, and we're going to line them up with measure 11. And some of these are not going to start measure 11. Some of these parts, I think it's the cellos and the violas maybe, like this I believe is one, they start a little bit after measure 11. So I'll tell you what, before we do that, let's go through here, figure out what all these are, and we're going to label them on here and then put them in order, like in the groups of what each instrument is. That way we kind of know what we're looking at. Alright, so we've got our all of our tracks in here now, and you can see, remember we changed our tempo at measure 11. This is where our tempo jumps up to 143, and all these tracks are not in the same place. So some of them are pretty similar, like these are pretty close to each other, these are pretty close to each other, but a lot of them are in different places. So what we're going to do now is we're going to use a special tool. They call it the audio bend tool. You can do this a couple different ways. This may be unique to Studio One as far as what the tool is called, but I think every program probably has something similar to this. So what we're going to do is we're going to, I'll show you two different ways to do it. First way you can do it, click on this and it opens up some more options here for you. We'll start with this first part. Click on the part that you want to edit, which is the first violin one part here we got. And then we're going to hit Analyze. And what this does, you see how all these little lines pop up. These are transients. And transients basically is like what the computer thinks the beat is. So if it thinks this is not necessarily on the beat, but it's on an eighth note somewhere. So it's trying to find beats that are on one of these eighth notes because we have it set to quantize eighth notes right now. So this is handy sometimes if you have like a drum part, especially because it can line up all the beats of the drum part. But for something like this, for a violin, I've found that it's not as handy to use this automatic function. You can use this threshold to adjust. You can see when I slide this, it puts more or fewer lines, transients on there. It detects fewer transients the lower it goes. So I've found that what I usually do is I just hit remove, so it takes all the transients out. The only reason I use this is to bring up this option that it has to analyze the track. Because there's a secondary option you can do, which is what I usually use. I'm going to solo this track here. I use this button right here, which is the bend tool, and this is like a manual version. So this is the automatic version. You can use this for, like I said, drums and stuff. It's a little bit better. But for more melodic things or things. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go through and I'm going to select solo on all these tracks. I don't know of a way to do it all like universally for all the tracks at the same time. There may be, but I don't know of one. So I'm just going to click on the track. I may have already done most of these. And then I'm going to make them all on solo. And then I'm going to go ahead and start time stretching this first part from measure 1 up to measure 11 where the tempo changes. transients and the time bending, audio bending, that less is kind of more with this. So I've already put this where I wanted it to go, where I want it to start. So the melody's going to start right here on the and of 1, because this is in tempo. And this is, I've already marked, I've listened to it and marked where beat 2 should be. It should be about right there. I can move it a little bit later. So instead of going through here and marking every single beat and trying to make every beat line up with one of these little notches, I'm just going to go to beat 2 over here, and I'm going to drag beat 2 over a little bit. Try to make it line up with that 2. Let's do this. Give myself a little bit more room to work with. There we go. So now, hopefully, this should stretch down a little bit, should shrink down, be a little bit faster. And this should be a little bit longer, and we'll adjust this part in a second. But for right now, this should be a little bit shorter. So we need to adjust this a little bit. It's actually right here is where it should start. So we're going to delete this one, stretch this out to here. Let's try that. And this needs to start right on beat 2, so we're going to shrink this down just a hair. Yeah, and you'll hear at the beginning there's a little bit of a weird electronic sound where it's got a little bit of distortion on it. That's probably trying to stretch this part out a little bit, which is not going to be a big deal, because when we get done doing this, we're going to delete this little chunk at the beginning, because this is all just background noise. That's all that is. It sounds like an air conditioner or a lawnmower or something in the background. So that's not going to be that big of a deal. Plus, when everybody's playing, when all the parts are together, you're not going to hear that. You're not going to hear a little electronic-y sound at the beginning of that. So I'm going to go through and work on doing the rest of these the same way. And again, if you do this, remember, less is more. You can even zoom out and see if there's another transient set somewhere, because sometimes that'll affect the rest of it. And right now it's a little bit different because we have the parts split. So right now this part's split right here, so it's a little bit different anyway, but we'll deal with that again later when we get to it. So for right now, I'm going to go through just this first section, the slow section of each one of these, and try to set it up so we're at least on the right parts of the beat. And we finish right at the end of measure 11, or beginning of measure 11. So that measure 11 at the very first beat is our tempo change. This should be all the way over here by the time I'm done. So let's go ahead and go through this. I wanted to show you something real quick before I finish this process up. I've been working on this for a little while now, and you can see how I've gotten up to measure 64 here. I'm working on the first violin parts by themselves first, just one chunk at a time. You can see right here how none of these shapes really line up. I'm going to let you listen to what this sounds like. Alright, so you can hear all the parts in there, but they're not playing at the same time. Nothing's lining up. And that happens a lot whenever you're putting music together like this. So the kids all play the right notes, they play the right rhythms. Just some of them played too fast or too slow based on the tempo I have this set at, which is 143 on this part. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to look for shapes that line up, that match up. So for example, this right here, I'm going to start with the top part. This is like a cone shape. Alright, so I'm going to look down through the next few parts, see if I find a cone shape, which is right here. There's one right here, one right here. Then if you look again, there's another like a ball shape and a ball shape here. There's two there, two there, two there. And then a backwards cone here, backwards on that one. So the shapes all line up as long as the parts are all played correctly, which these parts are. So all I'm going to do is, I know what the piece sounds like in my head from conducting it a bunch of times, so I'm just going to go through and line these up based on the notes, or where the beats are. So that one just needs to go there. This one, I'm just clicking and dragging, and again I'm using this little audio bend tool right here, the manual version. This goes right here. This one goes right here. Now something that happened on this one you may have noticed, when it was back over here, everything is green, which means basically it's the same timing, same time stretch that it was whenever we imported the track, this piece of music. Whenever you start moving things left or right, the more you stretch it out, the darker it becomes. So it becomes pink, and then like red, and then orange, and that's telling you, you can see the waveform changing too. That's telling you it's going to be a lot slower, way out of tune, or out of tempo I should say, from what it was before. So if you have a piece that's really dark red like this, you may want to try adjusting it somewhere else if you can, so it doesn't have one long piece that's stretched out and makes it sound bad. But we don't have to have that because we're only going to line it up this far, so it's still, all this is a little bit off color except for this new part that we haven't touched yet. But it should line up a lot better. Now we're going to do one more little chunk right here. The other end of this is where the next beat is, and I just know from looking at it and from what the piece sounds like in my head. So I'm going to scoot that over to the next measure. I said next beat earlier, but the next measure. And scoot that over. This one again is a little bit too soon, happening too soon in the time, so we're going to scoot that over. And this one is happening too slowly, so we're going to scoot that over. I actually clicked the wrong thing, but I clicked the second beat. So this is where we need to be. I'm going to delete this one. You see it stretch back out a little bit. Alright, so now if I go back to these two measures that sounded terrible before, all the parts were there, it just wasn't in time. I'm going to play this, the same thing again here, so you can listen to it. Yeah, and you can hear sometimes a little bit of distortion in the sound. That's just where you stretch the sound out a little bit, and the computer has to kind of fill in the details based on what it's hearing automatically. So there's a chance that you can hear it now while it's just a few parts at a time, but you're not going to hear it when it's a whole piece playing together, whole orchestra playing together. I want to show you one last thing here as I'm continuing this process. Like I said, I'm working on just the violin ones right now. I've worked a little bit on other parts, kind of bounced around some. Here are all the parts I've got together so far. I've got violin ones, violin twos, violas, one cello, and I'm waiting on a bass part that I haven't gotten yet from the kids. So all these vertical lines, all the lines through here, are as far as I've made it through the piece so far. So you can see I've made it almost all the way through on the violin ones, about half violin twos, about almost half violin threes, or violas I should say, and about half on cellos. So those are all different markings, and you can tell just from looking at them that they kind of line up from top to bottom vertically, because that's all where the rhythm is. It's all based on beats. And a lot of times, I didn't mention this earlier, but a lot of times I try to do this in at least one measure chunks if I can. So you can see, starting where we just left off in the violin one part, this is one measure, it's another measure, 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 measure. There are a few in here I had to adjust a little bit because the timing of them wasn't exactly right within the measure, but most of the time it's going to be at least a measure if I possibly can. I don't want to get into making a whole bunch of little tiny adjustments, because then for one thing it takes a long time, but for another thing it makes it sound too mechanical and not very human. And humans are playing this, so I want it to sound human, I want it to have musicality, and part of that is not playing it exactly, precisely the right time, the same time. So hopefully that helps a little bit. I'm going to finish this up. It could take a little while longer, so I'm going to finish working on this, get all these parts lined up, and then I'll check back. I'm going to give you one final look here. I've got all the parts marked out except for the bass part I'm still working on. I'm still waiting on. Got all the parts marked out here with the transients. Here's from the beginning of it. Remember, all those vertical lines are transients. Most of them are on some kind of eighth note. They're all on some kind of eighth note. There's the end, all the way to the end.